Good to have you with us today. Over the last 2 decades, there has been a constant dispute over the link between childhood vaccination and autism in America, as well as the overall difficulty of taking any vaccine manufacturers to court.
Do vaccines cause autism? In the last 30 years, the childhood vaccine schedule has tripled, while the U.S. autism rate has skyrocketed from 1 in 10,000 to 1 in 50. Dozens of published research papers show that, yes, vaccines and autism are linked. Yet the debate rages on, in part because of the 1986 National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act, passed by Congress as a result of pharmaceutical lobbying. It shields drug companies from liability for injuries and deaths caused by the vaccines they manufacture.
The situation is even more complicated by the fact there is only one measles vaccine supplier in all of America. Merck has monopolized the country's vaccine market and spends huge amounts of money lobbying for its interests. And vaccines are among its most profitable areas. A number of high-profile figures are concerned about mandatory child vaccination and that of corporate power. Jim Carrey is among a number of Hollywood actors involved.
In the last few decades, corporate influence has turned the vaccine program into more of a profit engine than a means of prevention.
The pharmaceutical industries are doing fine. They're making billions of dollars, and they're increasing more shots, and it's at the cost of our children. You can't make people do procedures that they don't want.
Some parents who are convinced that vaccines contributed to their children's illness say manufacturers just don't care, and they will never have to face any legal action.
He was developing typically a healthy boy. He had a vaccine reaction that was not properly diagnosed that he did recover from, but they kept vaccinating him on schedule with the same vaccine he first reacted to. And at 18 months, he suffered a neurological regression. He was given an autism diagnosis. It's the greed of the pharmaceutical industry not taking care of the damage, so it's kind of falling apart more quickly. We have a situation now where most of the research shows that vaccines cause autism, and yet the claim is continually made that there's no link whatsoever, and they only can do that because no one can get into a courtroom.
I have a son with autism. I believe that it is at least in part vaccine related. He was approximately 15, 16 months old, and he regressed. Well, there is a special committee that's supposed to keep an eye on that, but unfortunately there's a sort of a revolving door between that committee and Big Pharma. You know, Julie Gieberding was the head of the CDC down in Atlanta, and she's now head of vaccination for Merck.
The manufacturers deny that vaccinations are in any way related to autism. Brian Hooker, a former bioengineer, told us that he thinks that research into any possible links is deliberately being kept out of the public domain.
Vaccines in general are understudied, and we just don't know that much about, the effect of the entire vaccination schedule and the autism epidemic. I requested and received tens of thousands of pages of documents over the last about 11 years, and those reveal, a consistent pattern on the CDC that if there is a relationship between vaccines and some type of neurological disorder, then there's an insistent pattern to cover up that relationship. A part of their job is to promote vaccine uptake. They want to make sure that 90% of the individuals in the United States are fully vaccinated, so they have a strong stake not to release this information. Indeed, if they release this information, then that could cause vaccination rates to go down, and that's something that CDC is not prepared to handle.
The Colima volcano in western Mexico continues to erupt following mass evacuations. The eruptions are growing in intensity. At least one airport has been closed, and many more people may have to be moved. At least 20 protesters arrested in Paris during Bastille Day celebrations, many of them dragged away by police ahead of a traditional military parade. The demonstrators want the French government replaced with a collective of volunteers of all political beliefs. The violence in Ukraine, which appeared to be stuck in the east, is now spreading west. 2 separate blasts targeting police stations in the city of Lvov, injuring several policemen. They were taken to hospital. It's currently unknown who's behind them. The dual attacks come after a violent standoff in the western town of Mukachevo. It was between far-right extremists from the right sector and the police. 3 people killed when a business deal involving nationalists and supporters of an MP turned ugly. And the violence across Ukraine and Kiev's fight against the right sector, the subject of the latest episode of Crosstalk.
It's in Kiev forced to fight its own fascist militias. Are you surprised?
I'm not really surprised because I've actually watched over the last 2-3 months how the coverage of the conflict in Ukraine has actually been changing. In a lot of Western countries, that applies to Britain as it applies to America. And I think that the difficulties inside Ukraine have started to take precedence over the idea that basically this is a war between Moscow and Kiev.
A year ago, there was tragedy on the Moscow metro when a subway train braked suddenly in one of the deepest sections of the underground system. And although the investigation is still ongoing, today people are laying flowers outside the affected station to remember the victims of that tragedy. Well, up next here on RT International, breaking views from Afshin Rattansi. Drone strikes in the UK's fast-track detention centres. You're going underground.